ignoring the negative side because they're seen as being together, so you can't take them away. At secondary school, I went to Grainville and then Hollier. There was pretty much no religious influence at all there. I can't remember doing carol services. We didn't have to pray at the end of assemblies. But when you're going through secondary school, you're sort of at that age where you are sort of discovering yourself. You're finding out what it is that you're really interested in, what's important to you. And when I was 16 to 17 years old, that's when I realised I was quite a political person. I was an atheist at that point, and I was discovering politics. I was deciding what sort of society I believed in, imagining a world that was better than the one that we actually live in, something that I hope most Christians also believe in, creating a world that's better than the one we live in. All of my friends were atheists. Nobody attended church. We all found it really boring. It didn't seem to have any sort of relevance to us. But at the same time, the sort of dogmatic atheism that was quite fashionable at the time, people like Richard Dawkins, for example, that also put us off quite a lot as well, because that as well didn't seem to have any room for debate in it, didn't seem to be inclusive. So as teenagers who are probably, when you're a teenager, that's probably when you're at your most idealistic. You've got strong views on how to make the world a better place. When I was at school, the thing everybody cared about was the environment, and I think most of us were probably quite anti-establishment. If you think about it, Jesus as a human being, forgetting all of the religious connotations for the moment, just looking at him as a historical human being, well, he should actually be quite attractive to teenagers, I think. This is somebody who was a real thorn in the side of the establishment at the time, so much so he was actually killed for it, which, okay, maybe we shouldn't idealise him in that way, but he should really be relevant to teenagers' lives in at least a historical sense, in the same way that most teenagers would have admired Nelson Mandela or Mahatma Gandhi. So I grew up not really seeing any relevance for Christianity in my life, although I did quite enjoy the stories. I quite enjoyed watching films that sort of connected onto Christian stories. It would sound like a ridiculous example, but aren't the Indiana Jones films really good? And they've got the background to some of the biblical stuff. But that's a great way of just conveying that message that I think is quite useful. A few years ago, the Church of England had their debate on whether women should be allowed to become bishops. And I remember watching it on the news and being filled with rage and indignation when I saw the result of this vote being called out. It had been lost. Women weren't going to be allowed to become bishops. And I remember seeing the camera close in on some of the women that were there with tears streaming down their faces. They were so upset at what had just happened. And as an atheist, I remember looking at that and just being so angry that an organisation that should be standing up for something good and right, from my perspective as someone who doesn't necessarily understand the theological arguments for or against, and I think the majority of the population probably don't understand those arguments either, looking at it for what I perceived as right and wrong, I was really angry to the point where it made me really just not have the time for the church anymore. I thought, this is an organisation that doesn't want to help itself, isn't in touch with what I view as a sort of 21st century young person. And you see lots of things connected to that as well. I think most of my generation finds the issue of gay rights to be pretty uncontroversial, and you often see on the news people from a religious perspective putting across an argument that doesn't really have any relevance for young people who have a set of values that's perhaps different to that. But when I was eventually elected to the States a few months ago, one of the first invitations I got was from St Mark's Church, where I got invited to go have lunch there, find out what it is they do, what they're hoping to do in the future. And I saw, I was really impressed. They told me about how they do debt management courses for people who are struggling to get by and finding themselves in trouble. And they also give out food parcels to people who are hungry, just bags of vegetables to take home and feed their family if they've, maybe getting towards the end of the month and haven't been paid when they'd hoped to, etc. And I thought that struck me quite a lot. I saw an organisation that perhaps a few years ago I wouldn't have given the time of day, and actually physically saw the good they're doing on the street. And I found that really impressive and quite profound. And I think that's the point, is that you can't paint all people with the same brush. Everybody's different, even people within the same organisation. There's going to be a plurality of different views. There's positives and negatives. And I think what would help is for those positives to be emphasised. I don't think they're emphasised enough.